everyone, welcome to this video about sewing the Marshall set top part. I'm going to be sewing a size 86 for my son. First, let me just show you a couple other ones I've sewn. This is again a size 86 from this beautiful shark fabric. And here you can just see how the seams go. The center front seam, the yoke seam, and the shoulder seams has a standard cuff like any knit shirt. This one I used a separate fabric for the collar band because I added a snap placket here because my son's just size 86. He needs some help getting it over his head. This one is one I made for myself, and I just want to show this one because on the neckband, a little bit dusty, you can see that what the neckband looks like. The big question about how does the neckband look when it's pieced from lots of different little pieces, you can see on this one that it's barely even visible. So I think that's just a good example of what a great basic top this looks like, even with this very nice narrow neckband. So I think let's get started. We'll speed up a little bit because here I've just cut this rectangle of fabric and I'm going to fold it in half extra precisely, keeping the fold on my right hand side. And after I line up all the edges, we're going to do a little bit of a technical trick here and switch to another fabric because I screwed up the video. Anyway, this is the same size, still size 86, and I'm starting by making all of these measurements around the outside edges. And after I've got all of my marks around the outside edges, I'm going to start drawing my lines. First, a perfectly vertical line here, using this paper as a ruler to be sure that I have a 90-degree angle, and I'm measuring out these different lines. And then after I do that, I'm going to draw the connecting lines, either using the paper or the measuring tape. Just be sure to get a nice straight line there, but again, a couple of millimeters here and there isn't going to hurt at all. Drawing in the top of the sleeve now, and then lastly drawing in this other line here. After everything is drawn, now we've switched back to the other fabric, then I'm going to start cutting it out. And after everything is cut out, one last thing we're going to cut is here to separate these two cuffs. We're not going to cut anything at the center front because we want our center front to stay in one piece. These little extra bits here, if they're big enough, you might want to save them for the collar later, but they're not really necessary. Here we have our back, our sleeve, and our front. These pieces are ready to go. We have our yokes here. We're going to mark this one corner here, which is a 90-degree corner. Mark all four of them. That's going to help us when we start sewing. Yeah, and we have our cuffs here as well, yeah. And the other thing that we need to mark is going to be the pivot point. We need to mark it on the sleeves and also on the front and the back. It's going to be the same measurement on all pieces. So we're going to mark all four places. And then after that, we're going to mark the other side as well. Be sure that you mark the second part, so mark the back as well. And after we've marked the last one here. All right, and that's it. Our pattern is ready to go. So let's start sewing. First step is going to be with the yokes. I've got all four yokes here, and we're going to line them up with the marked corner at the top and the bottom, like so. Don't worry about these extra lines here. Those aren't anything important. It was from a different pattern, doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew the shoulder seams first, and then we're going to sew the center, which looks like this. Here's the shoulder seams and then the center part. If you were leaving a shoulder, like to make shoulder snaps or something, you'd want to leave that open, but we're not doing it that way now. So I've sewed the shoulders and pressed them open, and then I sewed the center, but I didn't do anything with that yet. I mean, I didn't press it yet because now we're going to draw the neck curve also, and it's easier if you don't press it. At this point, either could be the front or the back, doesn't really matter, you can decide. But once you've decided, then start with drawing in these measurements, we're measuring from the seam here, not from the cut edge. And we want to measure the back neckline and the side and the front, and make some little points where they go. Again, measuring from the sewing line, not from the cut edge. And then after that, we're going to draw in the curve. At the seams here, it wants to be at a 90-degree angle. And then after that, we're just going to draw as gentle of a curve as we can. That's a little bit bigger, but that's going to be fine. That could be a little bit better, but that's okay. Just as long as there's no sharp corners anywhere, it's going to be fine. And then we're going to cut this out. And then after cutting it out, we have two ways to finish this. You can cut a separate band, or what I'm going to do for this one is that you can use this cutout to make a neckband. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, but this is a bit of a slow process, so we're going to speed it up a little bit. I actually took the time to unpick everything so that I could have the maximum amount of fabric. So really, I unpicked everything and then measured everything very carefully, and then unpicked some more and measured and measured. What you want to do is to max out your fabric and then cut some 2.5 centimeter wide strips, which happens to be 1 inch. That was nice and easy. And then assemble them with as small of a seam allowance as possible into a strip like this. This is my strip, and it was just long enough. I needed 33 centimeters for my neckband, so it worked out well. And then after you've got your strip, you're going to join it in a loop, again with a very small seam allowance, and then fold it in half, wrong sides together, and baste it. And you can see I've already folded it and basted it here. Now, I'll tell you that normally I am not a fan of basting. If a pattern tells me to baste, I usually just skip it because who needs basting? This pattern, it really is important for two reasons. First of all, because this is a really narrow piece of fabric. It's so tiny, basting just makes it easier. And also because look how the basting has sort of stretched out the outside as it's already starting to like form itself into a circle, and it just makes the makes the neckband look so much nicer. So let's get it joined on here. We're going to find the quarters here. I'm going to mark out the quarters with pins. This part is a little bit fiddly, that's for sure. Everything with the neckband is fiddly because it's very tiny, but I promise you it is worth it. It looks so nice when it's finished. Here on the yoke, we're also going to mark the quarters. We have the front and the back seams to mark the half, and then we're going to fold it like this and just mark the quarters here so that we can match everything up nicely. And we're going to speed up a little bit and line up this band around the neck hole. I'm matching up the quarters that I marked, and I'm lining up the raw edges. The raw edges of the band are a few millimeters away from the raw edge of the neck. The neckband is going to stretch a little bit to fit. That's fine, we want it to do that so it'll be nice and smooth afterwards. Yeah, you can see how much it's stretching here. Yeah, just a little bit. And I've lined it all up, sort of, a few millimeters away from the edge there. And after sewing it, you can see this even better. You can see how it's a few millimeters away. The important part is that when you sew it, you want to keep it nice and even between the stitching line and the folded edge here. You don't want to keep that as even as possible so that when you finish the neckband and flip it out, the neckband is going to have an even width all the way around. That's the important part there. After pressing it and top stitching it, this is what it looks like. I use this nice decorative top stitch here, and you can see how nice it looks. It's not completely flat, and that's fine because the hole isn't flat. Remember, there was a bit of an angle to the pieces, so that's going to be fine. If you fold it at the shoulder seams, you can see that now it looks very nice and flat. You can see the little angle of the shoulder seams here, and it just looks very nice here. Hopefully yours looks equally nice. So that was the hardest part, and we're over it now. The rest of it's downhill from here. Here's the back pieces. I've already sewed it together at the center back seam, and I've pressed this seam open. Again, there's these lines here, don't worry about them. But we're going to be joining the back now to the back of the yoke. That's this longer bit here. Be sure you don't join it to the front. You don't want the seam there. So let's line up our yoke and our back here. It's easy to line up the center because both of them have a seam. So we're going to pin that together there. And then at this end we have this pivot point, and that's going to be 1 centimeter away from the edge of the yoke. You can see how they line up, or I guess don't line up there by 1 centimeter. And we're going to sew it, stop there, and then back stitch a little bit. We're going to do that at both sides to leave this pivot point open. After I've sewn them on, actually I sewed both back and the front together here. This is what it looks like. You can see how we're going to join the sleeve here. First just creasing it to find the center. And then after we've creased it, we know where to line it up. And I'm going to line up the seam with the crease here. And then I'm sticking a pin right in this pivot point so that we can see it easily on both sides. This seam, if we press it open, that's what makes it easier. I should have pressed it open, but now I'm just going to finger press it. And it lines up right with the pin there. Let's zoom in a little. And you can see how this lines up. I'm actually going to move this pin and use it to hold this seam allowance in place here. And then this part I'm going to sort of pivot around. The edges will line up here. And I'll stick a pin there to keep it. And then we're going to smooth this part out into a nice 45-degree angle. I can fold down like that. Line it up a little bit better and then pin that in place. Yeah, and then we're going to do that on the other side as well. Yeah, and when we sew, we're going to sew just below the point here. If you sew above, you'll end up with a hole in your underarm. So sew just below and over. And this is what it looks like after it's sewn. You can see at the top of the sleeve here, I haven't really bothered with the point. I've just sewn in a sort of smooth line. We don't really need to keep the point there at the top. You don't want a point in your sleeve. And here at the pivot point, you can see what it looks like. So now our sleeves are joined. So, starting to look like a real shirt now. We're getting close to the end. The next step is going to be, just like with any other knit shirt, what you would do, fold it in half and sewing up the side seams and the other underarms. At the underarm here, you can push the seams open or push them in opposite directions, however you like. And then we're going to add the cuff and the hem after we sew the side seams. The hem is just a standard folded up 1 centimeter or 2. And here's about the cuffs. You can see you have these 2 cuff pieces here. All right, well actually 4. And 2 of them are slightly smaller than the other. That's going to be important. And they have an angled edge, which means that the top part is slightly smaller than the bottom. We want this top edge to be closer to the wrist. The bigger edge is going to join to the shirt itself. And the smaller of the 2 is going to be the inside of the cuff, because the inside has a smaller circumference, and I'll show you what I mean with that later. Here's what the cuff looks like. What we're going to do is to fold them in half and sewing the short edges like this. After those are sewn, we're going to sew it together. You can see this one's already done. That's like putting one inside the other, right sides together, sewing around, and then we're going to turn it right side out. The seams, you can either put them together, or I put them on opposite sides here because this fabric was a little bit bulkier. And after you've done that, you turn it right side out and it looks like a normal cuff. This is the part where it's better if the slightly smaller cuff is on the inside, just because there's slightly less fabric there, and it's, you can see on this one how it's a little bit bulky, but if I turn it right side out, yeah, this is better. It just lines up slightly nicer. That 1 centimeter less of fabric just makes a nicer cuff. So if you screw it up, don't worry about it. It's not going to make that big of a difference. But so it's not too big of a deal. Just if you can remember to do it that way, that's good. So when the cuff is finished, we're going to sew it into our sleeve. If we've already sewn the side seam, we're going to line up the seam in the cuff with the underarm seam, and then just sew it all around. And here's what it looks like. I've sewn these cuffs, sewn them around. Of course, I sewed the side seams as well. I finished my hem. I used this decorative stitch again because I think that's nice. And the shirt is finished. Let's have a look. Turning everything right side out here. And look at how nice this looks. I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I hope that yours has turned out equally well. And we are finished. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and thank you very much for watching.